The meeting began in silence but quickly gained momentum. The first topic was the demon sighting in the Black Mountain. Ethanil, the residing head with divinity, stated that this was a more serious matter than the demon appearing in the capital. They emphasized that each school must issue orders or cooperate with the church, and mages needed to be dispatched to suspicious regions. The matter was resolved with surprising ease, as no families opposed Ethanil's opinion. However, there was still much to discuss: which schools would dispatch mages, what countermeasures to implement in demon-prone areas, and what revisions were needed to dungeon and demon hunting laws. For nearly 4 hours, the round table buzzed with debates and decisions. Throughout it all, he remained silent, reserving his right to speak only 3 times. Finally, the chairperson announced that they would adjourn for a short break. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He had rushed to the meeting like a madman, desperate not to be late, and now he was utterly drained, both of mana and stamina. Yet, despite the exhaustion, his appearance remained flawless. Deculein's traits really are annoyingly impressive, he thought with a hint of frustration. He stepped outside to clear his head and spotted a petite man with brown hair pacing near the exit. It was Alan, who ran over to him with tears welling in his eyes. Alan apologized profusely for being late, explaining that they wouldn't let him in once the meeting had started. He assured Alan that he was fine and told him to spare his worries. Internally, he admitted that he could no longer see Alan as innocent. There was definitely something off about his identity, but he couldn't figure out why or for what purpose. A quote from a famous movie in his previous world came to mind: "Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer." He decided it was better to keep a close eye on Alan. He told Alan to stand next to him from now on, and Alan nodded obediently. He resolved to uncover what Alan really was, no matter what. The 30-minute break passed quickly. While the other heads retreated to their waiting rooms to exchange opinions and broker deals, he stayed with Alan, doing nothing else. When the break ended, he returned to the round table, taking his seat with Alan standing beside him. The next topic was far more contentious: the Blood Shroud Sorcerer. He knew this wouldn't be resolved as easily as the previous topic. Woojin, the head of the Vairad family, compared the Blood Shroud race to cockroaches, claiming they were breeding by secretly laying eggs within society and corroding their lands. Ethanil, the head of the Braun family, countered by asking what evidence Woojin had for such claims, pointing out that they lacked the means to differentiate Scarletborn from other races. Woojin argued that they could invent a method, using their blood as a basis, and insisted that they must eradicate the Scarletborn as soon as possible, using the Imperial Magic Tower. Ethanil sharply rebuked Woojin for using the word eradicate, and their opinions clashed from the start. Woojin continued, stating that the Scarletborn were recognizing one another and gathering, and he was certain they had a leader. He warned that they didn't know what the Scarletborn were scheming. Ethanil retorted, saying it is speculation. In the novel, the Scarletborn, or the Red Box, were a unique clan. Their existence was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but many among them had developed extraordinary talents. There was indeed someone, a genius or prodigy, who united and commanded them from the shadows. According to the game's plot, the leader was a messiah, akin to Buddha or Jesus. The reason to eradication of Red Box because Red Box were the wizard's Achilles' heel. Woojin's voice rose sharply as he addressed the room, his tone filled with disgust. He questioned how anyone could not be repulsed by the thought of a hidden Scarletborn leader gathering their forces and potentially plotting something in secret. He criticized the lukewarm response from her, comparing it to the indifference mages had shown 60 years ago, which had led to the blood of countless mages being spilled. His words hung heavily in the air, leaving the room in silence. Glithian, who had been observing Deculein since earlier, finally spoke up. He turned to Deculein and asked for his opinion, noting that the Yukline family was an established house that had spearheaded the war against devils since ancient times. All eyes turned to Deculein. Internally, Deculein reflected on his perspective as someone from modern-day Earth. He had seen the consequences of ethnic discrimination and knew that hatred fueled by ignorance always led to unnecessary suffering. Even setting aside those reasons, he believed that oppressing the Scarletborn wasn't the right path. He resolved to delay their oppression as much as possible, not only to prevent needless bloodshed but also for the sake of the future main quest. After all, he knew that the true enemy of this world wasn't the Scarletborn. Deculein spoke calmly, acknowledging that the Scarletborn had indeed been their enemy in ancient times. However, he pointed out that if one examined the history books closely, Much of the conflict had been based on misunderstanding. He referenced the Woojin witch incident 237 years ago, where Woojin had been falsely accused of being a witch, sparking widespread persecution and leading to the massacre of countless Scarlet-born. This had started a cycle of endless bloodshed. He also mentioned the incident from 4 years ago that Vathan had brought up, explaining that it had been a political matter stemming from the discovery of a mana stone mine in Scarlet-born territory. Vathan scoffed at Deculein's explanation, incredulous that a member of House Yukline would speak in such a way. He reminded everyone that House Yukline had killed the most Scarlet-born and had even taken the mine for themselves back then. He insisted that the Scarlet-born were undoubtedly a bloodline of demons, and that House Yukline, as devil hunters, should know this better than anyone else. Deculein responded firmly, clarifying that it was the Yukline tradition to hunt devils, not the Scarlet-born. Vathan, his voice filled with frustration, shouted that the Scarlet-born were devils. His outcry echoed through the hall, causing the round table to ring. His words carried the potential to incite another massacre, and a heavy silence fell over the room. Deculein then posed a pointed question to Vathan, asking if he was willing to bear the responsibility of his words. He warned that the very person who incited such hatred might just be the devil himself. Deculein ended his statement there, leaving the heads of the family staring at him in surprise. The first meeting concluded without a clear resolution, and the topic was pushed back to the next day. Glythian expressed his regret at having to part ways with Sylvia until the next meeting, to which Sylvia responded by telling him to stop exaggerating, as the meeting was only the next day. Glythian lamented the Rosary Hotel's rule of only one person per room and asked if she would be all right on her own. Sylvia brushed off his concern, stating that girls her age always slept in separate rooms from their dads. Glythian reminded her that Rosary had a high concentration of mana and could cause various magical phenomena at night, advising her to read the hotel rules. Sylvia assured him she knew and planned to stay in her room, telling him to stop worrying so much. The night rules for the Rosary Hotel of Berk's 4th District were as follows. 1. If you find an open door while walking around the hallway, never look inside or enter the room. 2. If someone knocks on your door, do not open it. You should also never answer it verbally. 3. There have been cases where bodies have been found in the bathroom. Do not panic and simply close the door. 4. Rosary Hotel is on the 1st floor of the building. Upon the appearance or discovery of stairs, do not climb up or down. 5. Once you lie on your bed, please refrain from walking until morning. Otherwise, you might be transported to a different space at any moment. 6. Making noise in the hallway is not allowed. The use of magic is also prohibited. Sylvia sat in her room skimming the rules. She thought to herself that the rules sounded like something meant to scare toddlers. She figured she'd be fine as long as she slept in her bed like always. Deciding to sleep, she lay down on her bed, with her hawk, Quickstone, perched quietly by her bedside. She bid it goodnight and closed her eyes, falling into a deep slumber almost instantly. According to the clock, she slept for about 3 hours before waking up with a dry throat. She rose and grabbed a cup of water from the shelf. After quenching her thirst, she turned around and froze. She wasn't in her room anymore. Instead, she stood in the middle of an endless hallway. Panic set in as she realized the space had suddenly changed into a corridor. She wondered if she had done something wrong. Chills clawed their way up her neck, and her back stiffened. The air felt heavy and oppressive, as if the hallway itself was alive and watching her. Sylvia has broken Rule 5, which states, once you lie on your bed, please refrain from walking until morning. Otherwise, you might be transported to a different space at any moment. Sylvia found herself standing in the dimly lit hallway of the Rosary Hotel, the cold floor beneath her bare feet sending a shiver through her body. The wind whistled eerily, though she couldn't tell where it was coming from. Her eyes darted around, landing on a staircase not far away. She knew she shouldn't use it. Rule 4 explicitly warned against climbing stairs in the Rosary Hotel. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that nothing bad would happen as long as she followed the rules. With her resolve solidified, she continued walking down the hallway until she stumbled upon a room with its door wide open. Rule 1 flashed in her mind. If you find an open door while walking around the hallway, never look inside or enter the room. She forced herself to keep walking, not even risking a glance, though her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. After a short while, Sylvia decided to try her luck. She stood in front of one of the closed doors and knocked. Knock, knock. No answer. She waited, but the door remained shut. The wind brushed past her again, sending another chill down her spine. She moved to the next door and knocked again. Knock knock. Still, no response. She tried twisting the doorknob, but it didn't budge. With no other option, she moved to the next door and repeated the process. Knock knock, nothing. She kept moving, knocking on door after door, but no one dared to open them. The wind in the hallway turned into a dreadful shriek, tearing through the silence like claws on glass. Sylvia hated scary things, and her instincts kicked in as she knocked harder. Knock knock, knock knock. Still, no one answered. The grunts and eerie sounds grew louder and clearer, and Sylvia knew she was running out of time. A cold breath brushed against the back of her neck, and at the same time, a door creaked open. The strange sense of deafness she had felt disappeared. Feeling the warmth of the room, she slowly looked up, trying to catch her breath. Deculein called her name as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He even opened the door wider, fearlessly inviting her in. "Are you lost?" he asked. Sylvia hesitated, but the bleak wind blowing in the hallway reminded her there was no time to think. She stepped inside, bowing her head and thanking him. The room was spacious and cozy, just as she had expected. Deculein sat in a rocking chair near the fireplace, while Sylvia perched on a small chair beside the bed. "I'm sorry," Sylvia said, explaining how she had ended up in the hallway after getting out of bed. Deculein picked up a book from the table, his eyes remaining on the page as he spoke. He explained that the high concentration of mana in Burke's air caused unexplainable phenomena, creating phantoms, magic that had taken on shapes and ego. He advised her to read the rules more carefully. Sylvia nodded, her lips trembling as she tried to calm herself. She asked why Deculein had been late that day, but he dismissed the question, saying she didn't need to know. She then asked if he liked books, to which he replied that reading was the second best hobby at most. At that moment, Deculein raised a finger, signaling Sylvia to stay still. A phantom appeared on the ceiling, a cruel, distorted accumulation of mana. Sylvia felt a surge of fear, but it lasted only a moment as Deculein's magic tore the phantom apart mercilessly. "I guess he came looking for you when I opened the door," Deculein said. Sylvia looked at the iron on his table and asked if he had killed the ghost with it. Deculein confirmed it, and Sylvia expressed her admiration. Deculein laughed, explaining that his weapon and magic were specialized in killing. However, he emphasized that magic wasn't made to kill people, and that the world needed a talent in wizardry like Sylvia's. Sylvia sat still for a moment before casting a spell. "It's scorched fire," she said proudly, showing it to Deculein. Though it had no sound or color, it made the fire in the fireplace grow. Deculein glanced at it from the corner of his eye and complimented her casting. Sylvia continued to showcase her magic, conjuring Thundercloud and Metal Leaf, each time earning Deculein's praise. However, he also pointed out her mistakes, correcting her with precision. When Sylvia asked what her weakness was, Deculein told her she should figure that out herself. She pouted, frustrated, but he reassured her that time was on her side, and that she would grow as much as she desired. "You're one of the 3 best talents in this dimension," he said confidently. He then told her to stop asking questions and go to sleep. Sylvia suggested they take turns keeping watch, but Deculein explained that the flow of time in the Highlands was unpredictable, and nights could stretch far longer than usual. Sylvia lay down on the bed, listening to the sound of pages turning and the warmth of the fire. Before she fell asleep, she glanced out the window and saw a falling star. It was beautiful. As soon as Sylvia fell asleep, Deculein left the hotel, following a faint lightning streak outside the window, a sign from his man of great wealth intuition. He intentionally violated the rules, causing some supernatural phenomena to occur, but they were nothing more than minor nuisances, like props from a low-budget haunted house attraction. Deculein wondered where the intuition was leading him as he made his way along the mountain path from District 4 to the Elders' Hall. This area, close to Burke's borders, was a high-end region typically inaccessible to most, reserved for elders or devoted students. Deculein knew there was a high probability of rare items hidden here, and he was determined to find them. As he strolled through the fog-drenched forest, a grotesque phantom emerged from the shadows, lunging at him with a guttural screech. But Deculein didn't flinch. He simply kept walking, leaving the phantom frozen midair in confusion. The phantom tried again, materializing in front of him with a nightmarish visage. But Deculein casually sidestepped it, continuing his stroll. Frustrated, the phantom hovered behind Deculein, its claws twitching with irritation. Deculein stopped and turned around, asking if the phantom had seen an item containing a lot of mana nearby. The phantom's glowing eyes widened, and ghostly tears streamed down its face as it let out a pitiful wail. Without another sound, It fled into the darkness, sobbing uncontrollably. Deculein watched it go, muttered, "What's wrong with it?" and resumed his walk. Despite the ghosts and phantoms' relentless attempts to haunt him, Deculein remained unfazed. Their efforts were futile, and he found their antics somewhat amusing. At the end of the air current, he found a piece of wood burning alone in the center of a scorched area. Purified magic tree. Fragment. Description: a fragment originating from a magic tree, rich in mana. Struck by lightning, it was torn from its source and purified, making it an excellent raw material for crafting. Category: miscellaneous item. Special timber. Magic trees use mana as nourishment to grow, and while most trees can't absorb mana from water or air, mutated ones occasionally develop this ability. These trees accumulate magical energy, making them both a potential threat to humanity and the best material for a wizard's wand. However, it's rare for them to be struck by lightning. Bercht's magic tree was of perfect quality, and the lightning strike had not only accelerated its maturation but also purified it. Deculein picked up the fragment, feeling its warmth and power. He knew that if he crafted it into a staff or wand, it would become a noble item capable of significantly enhancing a wizard's abilities, perhaps by more than half. Ignoring the phantoms around him, Deculein pressed on, continuing his exploration with the man of great wealth, his vision active. But soon he realized he was acting out of greed. He paused, silently gazing eastward as the morning sun rose slowly, its first rays touching the mountain peaks. As daylight crept in, the ghosts and phantoms began to lose their forms, dissolving into the light. The conference resumed at noon, with the goal of addressing the remaining agenda items left unfinished from the previous day. As expected, the discussion began with the contentious issue of the red box. Baton was the first to speak. He acknowledged that there was no definitive proof that the red box were devils, but argued that the magic flowing in their blood made them inherently dangerous. He questioned whether any human could possess such traits and warned that the red box could lose control of their magic at any moment, potentially transforming into demons. Deculein, however, dismissed Baton's claims as mere speculation. He accused the wizards of already condemning the red box as devils without evidence, pointing out that the entire clan had not lost control of themselves. Deculein criticized the wizards for focusing on a 1 in 1,000 possibility and using it as an excuse to ostracize an entire race. He likened their logic to calling a cup of water a cup of salt, just because a pinch of salt had been added. The room was stunned by Deculein's words, especially given his family's history. The Yukline family had played a significant role in the massacre of the Red Box 60 years earlier, a war that had allowed them to gain partial rights to mana stone mines. Baton, frustrated, brought up the Red Box's differing religion, but Deculein dismissed the topic, stating that religious discussions had no place at Bercht's round table. Despite Baton's growing anger, Deculein remained steadfast. The authority of the Yukline family in matters related to devils was undeniable, given their deep roots in the history of wizardry. With no resolution in sight, the moderator decided to table the Red Box agenda for later and called for a short break. During the break, Glythian was seen laughing in the waiting room, a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. Sylvia, his daughter, observed him with confusion, noting that he seemed both amused and deeply contemplative. Glythian wondered aloud about Deculein's true motives, but Sylvia knew he would never uncover the truth. She recalled Deculein's words from the previous night. Magic wasn't made to kill people. The conference resumed, and the remaining agenda items were addressed with relative ease. Deculein offered measured insights to ease tensions surrounding the Red Box issue, though most attendees were more focused on the day's topics than his remarks. Despite his efforts, the atmosphere remained tense, as defending the Red Box was seen as a villainous act by many. After 9 hours, the conference finally concluded. As the attendees left the Elders' Hall, Baton confronted Deculein, demanding to know his true intentions. He accused Deculein of secretly supporting the Red Box and reminded him of the Yukline family's role in the war 60 years prior. Deculein calmly advised Baton to temper his anger, emphasizing that a wizard's rationale should be free of such emotions. Baton, however, was unmoved, declaring that the Biarad family now loathed Deculein. As Baton stormed off, Essekil approached Deculein, expressing agreement with his stance on the Red Box. Essel believed that maintaining a low temperature with the Red Box would benefit everyone. While most of the other wizards remained silent, their disapproval was palpable. Deculein, however, felt no regret. He viewed his actions as a necessary sacrifice, knowing that future Bercht conferences would come more frequently and that the time between them would be crucial for growth. In a world without players, he hoped that a more virtuous named individual would emerge to make use of the remaining time. The morning of the following day, Deculein ventured down to the first district before leaving Bercht. He reflected on how the city, with its enigmatic highland architecture inspired by Machu Picchu, never failed to captivate him. However, his purpose for visiting wasn't sightseeing. He had come to acquire materials for a new wand. Deculein possessed a rare and valuable material for crafting a wand and planned to commission a master craftsman in Bercht. The city was renowned as a haven for magical materials, and he easily found what he needed: white tiger's fang, white swan's feather, mana stone candle, and more. The total cost came to 4 million elnes for 8 items. While Deculein didn't have that amount in his personal account, he used the Yukline family check, knowing Yariel would handle the payment later. Even if she didn't, he could cover the cost by selling the vase he had acquired earlier. As Deculein examined a mana stone, his thoughts were interrupted by Alan's excited voice. Alan called out to him, pointing to a familiar figure nearby. Lilia Premian, the vice director of the security bureau. Lilia's sharp eyes met Deculein's, and she acknowledged him with a nod. To express their gratitude for Lilia safely bringing Alan to Bercht, Deculein invited her to join them for a meal. The restaurant was quiet, with a subdued yet comfortable atmosphere. As they sat down, the aroma of freshly prepared food filled the air. Lilia thanked Deculein for the meal, but quickly shifted to business, explaining that she needed to ask him a few questions to complete her investigation. She inquired about the fate of his escort knight, Veron. Deculein calmly replied that Veron had died in the ambush. Lilia's expression remained neutral, but it was clear she was carefully assessing him. As the waiters served their meals, Deculein began eating, maintaining his composed demeanor. Meanwhile, Lilia's thoughts wandered, questioning what made Deculein so different, asking Lockhak. Previously, in Chapter 20, Deculein had captured Lockhak, who was subsequently sent to the Imperium. Located in the south and directly controlled by the Emperor, the Imperium serves as the backbone of the continent's administration. Protected by the rugged Kadia Mountains, it houses key institutions like the Foreign Affairs Bureau, the Justice Bureau, and the Internal Affairs Office. Within its walls lies a high-security criminal interrogation room under the jurisdiction of the Public Security Bureau, where Lockhak was detained. Lilia Premian, the deputy director of the Public Safety Bureau, stood before Lockhak. Known for her icy demeanor and sharp intellect, Lilia was a prominent figure within the Imperium. She informed Lockhak that he would be sent to Lockhak Prison, a place where he would likely spend the rest of his life, or perhaps not even survive a year. Her voice was cold and unyielding. Lilia demanded to know if Lockhak had any objections, but he remained silent. Frustrated, she ordered him to activate his ability. Lockhak smirked and complied, cutting off all magic in the area and disabling the surveillance crystal ball. Once the room was secure, Lilia's composure shattered. She berated him for endangering their clan, warning that his actions had only worsened the already oppressive public opinion against the Red Box. She revealed that the only reason he was still alive was for research purposes, and sternly instructed him not to mention the Red Box again. Lockhak questioned whether they could still coexist with the Empire, but Lilia insisted it was possible as long as they remained hidden. She argued that Red Box members were no different from ordinary humans except at birth, but Lockhak countered that their innate talents made them feared. Lilia, visibly angry but maintaining her indifferent expression, pressed him further, demanding to know why he had provoked Deculein. She revealed that the Yukline family was already under surveillance, and while they weren't planning to kill Deculein, the executioners wouldn't hesitate if necessary. Lockhak, however, defended Deculein, calling him a real noble, who had treated him with dignity and respect. He recounted how Deculein had recognized him as a Red Box but chose not to kill him, a gesture that made Lockhak believe even the Red Box could live in harmony with the world. Lilia was momentarily stunned by this revelation but quickly regained her composure. She reminded Lockhak of the Yukline family's dark history, pointing out that Deculein's ancestors had led the massacre and suppression of the Red Box. Lockhak argued that judging Deculein based on his ancestors' actions would only reinforce the belief that the Red Box were the devils. Their conversation grew more heated as Lilia accused Lockhak of endangering their clan's secrecy. She revealed that the Emperor's declining health could lead to a change in policy, and the clan's full-scale plans would be mobilized once the next Emperor ascended the throne. However, she doubted Lockhak would survive long enough in Lockhak prison to see that day. As security officials rushed in, alarmed by the disabled surveillance, Lilia ordered Lockhak to deactivate his ability and brace himself. Lockhak laughed, taunting her, but Lilia grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head against the desk. The officials desperately tried to restrain her as she continued to vent her fury, threatening to kill him on the spot. Despite their efforts, Lilia's rage was uncontrollable, leaving the room in chaos. As Lilia ate her meal, her thoughts churned with skepticism. She couldn't understand what made Deculein a true noble in Lockhack's eyes. To her, he was just another despicable figure, no different from the rest. Her icy gaze reflected her disdain. Suddenly, their quiet meal was interrupted by the arrival of Ehelm, who reeked of alcohol. The strong stench made Lilia wrinkle her nose in disgust. Deculein, visibly annoyed, questioned Ehelm's presence, stating that he had nothing to say to him. Ehelm, however, was undeterred. His face was flushed red from excessive drinking, and his words were slurred. He insisted that there was something he needed to hear from Deculein, something from the depths of what he called Deculein's dark, murky heart. Meanwhile, in the Freyhem Knights commander's office, Julie sat at her desk, her expression stern as she listened to Rockfell's report. Rockfell delivered the somber news that Varen had died during his mission. Julie's face paled, and her hands gripped the edge of her desk as the weight of the news settled over her. Despite the devastation in her eyes, her voice remained steady as she ordered Rockfell to make preparations immediately. She was determined to hear Deculein's explanation as soon as he returned. Primian wondered what was going on all of a sudden. Ehelm said that Deculein had been completely unpredictable the entire conference and that he didn't understand it at all. He demanded to know why Deculein was acting like that and risking the other mage house's anger. Ehelm glared, his eyes burning with contempt. He asked if Deculein was seriously afraid of the Scarletborn. Primian's thoughts raced in shock at the suggestion. Ehelm went on, reminding Deculein that he had once said he wanted to kill off the Scarletborn. No, that he had insisted they were an inferior race unworthy of living on that land. He added that the paper Deculein had written, condemning the Scarletborn, was still in the university archives. Then, with a cruel smirk, he questioned whether Deculein's change of heart was because his new slave working on his research was a Scarletborn. Alan slammed the table, shouting that Ehelm was going too far and demanding that he stop insulting Deculein. Deculein, calmly wiping his face, told Alan to calm down and assured him that he was fine. Then, turning to Ehelm, he remarked that Ehelm was like rotten cheese from the brain down, so it wasn't surprising for him to think like that. He added that it was understandable that Ehelm wouldn't get it. Ehelm's glare intensified. Then he flashed an odd smile and replied, "Right." Before leaving, Ehelm mentioned that he had heard there were 6 months left until Deculein's research presentation, or was it 3? He challenged Deculein, saying they would see how long he could keep this up until his vile blabber was exposed. With that final jab, he walked away, his unpleasant stare lingering until the end. Primian's hand trembled as she thought about how Deculein had acted like that even while risking offending the others. He had actually sided with the Scarletborn? Is this Deculein? She found it hard to believe. Staring at him, her mind reeled. She recalled Lockhack's words and wondered silently, was what he had said really true? The next day, before leaving Barrett, Deculein met Lockalok, one of the greatest named craftsmen, and commissioned a staff from him. System notification. Side quest complete. Lockalok's staff. The conditions for completing the quest were as follows. 1. Possessing sufficient fame or infamy. 2. Being a kind-hearted person or one who had reformed. 3. Offering the finest materials that could intrigue Lockalok. 4. Visiting at least twice. As a reward, Deculein received +1 store currency. A staff crafted by Lockalok. Lockalok was such a renowned craftsman that even the previous Deculein had supposedly visited him. In the process of commissioning the staff, an unknown quest had been cleared. On the train heading back to the Empire, Deculein happened to be in the same carriage as Badin. Throughout the journey, Badin made no effort to hide his hostility, but fortunately the tension never escalated into anything serious. As he turned a page in his book, Deculein reflected that this long journey was finally coming to a close. The group arrived quietly and safely at the platform. Alan stretched loudly as he stepped off the train, letting out an exaggerated groan. The landscape felt heavier than when they had first arrived. Thick snow blanketed the platform, and through the swirling flurries, Alan exclaimed that they only had to transfer once more and wondered aloud when they would finally see something besides snow. Deculein's attention, however, was drawn to a figure in white armor and a black cape. Julie, flanked by her identically dressed knights. As he approached, she continued to stare at him. With measured steps, he closed the distance between them. Deculein greeted her simply, saying her name. Julie replied that she had heard he was attacked and that she was glad he was all right. Her voice carried its usual tone, though it was firmer now. Frail, yet unwavering. Deculein thanked her, He assumed news about Veron must have reached them, though he wasn't sure how the story had spread. Many seemed displeased that he was the sole survivor. Julie's hand trembled slightly as she spoke. She mentioned that she had read about the incident in the paper, which claimed that Deculein and Veron had worked together to rescue the survivors. Deculein remained still. Without knowing which article she had read, he couldn't risk careless words. Julie then asked just one thing. She wanted to know what Veron had been like. Deculein weighed his response carefully, meeting her eyes. He had originally planned to tell her everything, that Veron had tried to kill him, that their fight had led to this outcome. But facing her now, he realized he couldn't. The truth would shatter her. Julie would blame herself as if Veron's sins were her own. For her sake, he decided to bury it, even if it meant earning others' hatred. The screech of arriving train wheels cut through the silence. A train staff member announced that the 4th train heading to the Empire was now boarding, and instructed ticket holders to board immediately. Deculein couldn't bring himself to lie outright. Instead, he replied that Veron had been quite emotional. Julie inhaled deeply and bowed her head. She thanked him and said they would head to Veron now, then wished Deculein a good rest before turning to leave with her knights. Deculein thought to himself that he was a fool too, unable to even untangle the emotions in his own heart. Alan muttered that those people were all so unreasonable. He complained that even though they were victims too, others looked at them as if they were the ones at fault. Deculein told him not to mind them, dismissing them as just fools. Then, unexpectedly, Sylvia's voice cut in, uncharacteristically unsteady. She asked why Deculein had held back. Deculein turned to her puzzled and asked what she meant. Sylvia didn't answer. Instead, she rummaged through her bag and thrust a book at him, saying it was her way of returning the favor. Deculein took it, bewildered, but before he could react, Sylvia dashed away. Alan asked what the book was, but Deculein admitted he wasn't sure either. The whole trip had been exhausting. All he wanted now was to rest. He told Alan they should hurry back, and Alan agreed. With that, they boarded the train. The changes the manga made to chapters 28 and 29, the Berthold shopping district. Having acquired excellent material for a wand, Deculein planned to commission one from Bercht's master craftsman after purchasing the necessary accompanying components at a magic store. As he walked through the marketplace, a familiar voice caught his attention at a nearby stall. Deputy Director of Public Safety Lilia Premien was engaged in what appeared to be either intense bargaining or an argument with a shopkeeper about camping equipment prices. Alan suddenly recognized her, excitedly pointing out that she was the one who had helped him reach Bercht, calling her his savior. Deculein approached as their discussion grew more heated. Premien insisted on seeing cheaper alternatives to the high-quality sleeping bag, while the shopkeeper maintained that anything less would be dangerously inadequate for Bercht's environment. When the exchange reached its peak, Deculein intervened, purchasing the expensive sleeping bag himself, with a Yukline family check and presenting it to a surprised Premien as compensation for her assistance to Alan. Though she clicked her tongue in apparent annoyance, she accepted the gift. At the magic store, Deculein proceeded to spend 4 million elns on 8 rare components, including White Tiger's Fang, White Swan's Feather, and Mana Stone Candle, an expenditure that made Alan visibly shudder. Their next stop was a luxurious restaurant where staff immediately recognized and welcomed Count Yukline. Their meal was interrupted by Ehelm Rivanda, already drinking wine in the morning, who made sarcastic comments about both Deculein and Premien's presence. Premien casually joined their table as if part of their group, still carrying her new sleeping bag, leaving Deculein to wonder if he had unintentionally triggered some sort of companion quest scenario. Ehelm, emboldened by alcohol, aggressively questioned Deculein's sudden change in stance toward the red box, referencing his old university thesis that had condemned them. He insinuated that Deculein might be employing a red box slave to conduct his research. Alan immediately leapt to Deculein's defense, but Ehelm persisted until Deculein dismissed him by saying his brain had become too rotten to understand. Before leaving, Ehelm ominously remarked that the truth would come out when Deculein presented his research in several months. After his departure, Premien quietly pointed out that if Ehelm's accusations were true, it would constitute a serious crime due to the abolition of slavery. Deculein dryly suggested she return the sleeping bag if she planned to continue such talk, and added that she should pay for her own meal as well, which effectively silenced her. She didn't dare utter even a single word while we ate. After finishing their meal, the group immediately left the restaurant. Premien, feeling obligated after receiving the sleeping bag, followed them like an NPC companion. Her presence proved unexpectedly useful when she intercepted a pickpocket targeting Deculein. They soon arrived at a dilapidated wooden building where Deculein dismissed Premien, telling her she could leave now. She replied she would consider the sleeping bag something she'd found on the streets. Deculein then instructed Alan to wait outside before knocking and entering alone. Inside, the scent of aged parchment and wood filled the air, while faint breezes whistled through cracked walls. Deculein called out formally, asking if anyone was present. A phlegmy voice responded from above, revealing a hidden staircase. The entire structure trembled as footsteps descended, eventually revealing an unforgettable old man. Deculein stated his purpose: to order a wand. The old man adjusted his glasses, recognizing him as Deculein. The craftsman then made unsettling observations about how Deculein had changed. His soul's orientation reversed, his demeanor gentler, even his speech patterns altered. Deculein maintained his composure and repeated his request. Rockalock eventually agreed, asking what kind of wand he desired. When Deculein insisted any form would suffice, provided all materials were used, he presented the magic tree fragment from his coat. The craftsman's eyes gleamed with excitement at the rare material. After Deculein laid out his other high-quality acquisitions, Rockalock grew even more animated, suggesting the addition of Yukline blood to the mixture. Though hesitant, Deculein consented after learning about his lineage's magical properties. The bloodletting process was precise and painless. Rockalock estimated 10 days for completion and proposed a secure delivery method using a blood-enchanted vault. The quoted price of 4 million elns gave Deculein pause, but he proceeded with a family check, imagining Yariel's disapproval but knowing the vase sale would cover it. As the transaction concluded, system notifications appeared, announcing the completion of the Rockalock's Wand side quest. Deculein realized the original Deculein must have laid the groundwork during prior visits. With quiet satisfaction and a final bow to the chuckling craftsman, he exited the shop. System notification. Side quest completed. Rockalock's Wand. Conditions met. 1. Sufficient fame, infamy. 2. Proven virtue, repentance. 3. High-quality materials. 4. Multiple visits, rewards. Store currency +1. Rockalock crafted wand. This might be added in a future chapter, so I will keep it short. Meanwhile, at the Yukline head's office in Hadokine, Yariel, now the official lord, is frustrated over Deculein's choice of Alan, not her, as his assistant. Though she begrudgingly accepts their mutual hatred, a brief moment of joy comes when a friendly sparrow perches on her finger. But her mood sours instantly when she discovers Deculein has racked up an 8.02 million elns bill from Bercht, leaving her furious. Departure of Bercht. The train had been traveling at a steady 70 kilometers per hour when the system notification appeared, announcing the completion of the main quest, Bercht's Summon, and awarding 3 units of store currency. The rhythmic vibrations of the carriage seemed to amplify the tense silence between Deculein and Baton, who found themselves seated across the aisle from each other in the VIP compartment through unfortunate coincidence. For 2 full hours, neither had spoken, engaged in a silent battle of wills where neither would yield to the other's pride. Their eyes had met several times in sidelong glances before Baton finally broke the silence. He remarked that if this encounter had occurred 15 years prior, he would have immediately demanded a duel. Deculein noted internally that this timing was fortunate, as in his current weakened state, breaching Baton's magical defenses would have been impossible. Yet his instincts automatically responded that he didn't wish for Baton's death, a statement motivated purely by pride rather than any consideration of the 3 other house heads and 4 assistants sharing their carriage. When Baton proposed settling their dispute with a duel at the next station stop, Deculein warned him against choosing magical suicide over natural causes. At this provocation, Baton's magic visibly flared to life beside him, energy crackling and coiling like a serpent, preparing to strike. Deculein observed the gathering power with detached calm, making no move to respond in kind. Their confrontation was abruptly interrupted by Glythian's cheerful intervention. The older mage approached with loud clapping, alternating between patting their shoulders in a mock peacemaking gesture. He reminded Baton that he hadn't been present 15 years ago when the Bercht conference had claimed multiple casualties among attendees. In a whisper that carried clearly through the carriage, Glythian questioned whether Baton truly believed himself capable of besting Deculein in combat. When Baton appeared taken aback by this assertion, Glythian advised him that if he couldn't touch his toes, he should at least learn to bow, a pointed reference to knowing his limitations. Though Baton's jaw clenched visibly at this remark, he offered no verbal rebuttal against Glythian's authority. Turning his attention to Deculein, Glythian observed how much he had changed from his younger days when he would berate fellow wizards without provocation. Deculein retorted that Glythian talked too much, To which the older mage responded that verbosity was an old man's privilege, his eyes crinkling with amusement as he noted how Deculein had been but a child 15 years prior. The remainder of the journey passed without further incident or conversation between the two adversaries. Upon arriving at the platform, Alan stretched dramatically as they disembarked, his exaggerated groan cutting through the winter air. The station atmosphere felt markedly heavier than when they had departed, with thick snow blanketing every surface and muffling the usual sounds of travel. Through the swirling flurries, Deculein spotted Julie standing motionless in her distinctive white armor and black cape, flanked by her equally still knights. As Deculein approached through the accumulating snow, Julie stated that she had heard about the attack, her voice carrying its usual steadiness, yet somehow sounding more fragile than before. When Deculein confirmed he had indeed been attacked, Julie expressed relief that he remained unharmed, mentioning that newspaper reports had described him collaborating with Veron to rescue survivors from whatever incident had occurred. When Julie posed her single question, asking what Veron had been like in his final moments, Deculein offered the partial truth that he had been emotional. Julie inhaled sharply at this response before bowing her head in acknowledgement and thanks, stating that they would go to him now and that Deculein should rest well. As she turned to leave, snow settled delicately on her shoulders like a fragile veil. One of her knights lingered behind, his gaze heavy with unspoken accusation as he asked if Deculein would be joining them. Deculein declined the invitation, choosing to travel separately rather than subject himself to their judgmental company. The knight responded with a disapproving click of his tongue, a sentiment echoed by his companions as they followed Julie away. This display of ignorant contempt nearly made Deculein laugh aloud. So palpable was their disdain that he felt his jaw clench involuntarily. When Alan began to speak, Deculein sharply cut him off, commanding silence. Though rage simmered beneath his skin, he simultaneously felt strangely detached, as if observing the situation from outside himself. This paradoxical lack of anger left him unsettled, questioning what it revealed about his current state. Sylvia's unexpected intervention came as she approached through the snowstorm, her usually composed demeanor carrying an unfamiliar edge as she demanded to know why Deculein endured such treatment without response. When he asked for clarification, she wordlessly produced a book from her bag, thrusting it into his hands as what she called payment, before striding away without further explanation, ignoring Alan's attempt to intervene. As the train carrying Julie and her knights departed, Deculein caught one final glimpse through the snow-fogged window, Julie's faint but unmistakable smile, fragile yet sincere. This simple gesture, fulfilling some monthly promise between them, cut through his simmering fury with surprising clarity. With the emotional encounter concluded, he instructed Alan that they should return, as he required rest after the day's events. Julie and her knight order arrived at the scene not far from the fourth stop, less than an hour's journey from Bercht. A security department officer briefed them, his breath misting in the cold air. He explained that during the first attack, Professor Deculein had secured the train and rescued survivors alongside Sir Veron. However, in the second assault, the entire carriage had gone over the cliff, taking Sir Veron with it. Only the VIP carriage, where Professor Deculein had been, remained intact. Julie acknowledged his report, and the officer then showed them a copy of Rowan's photograph. He mentioned that the area was so remote that the only eyewitnesses were those directly involved and asked if they had seen the article. Julie confirmed that she had, including the image of Deculein sitting calmly inside the suspended train. The officer revealed that not all photos had been released, producing another image, this one depicting the corpses of the knights who had attacked the train. He speculated that the head professor might have subdued them, remarking that Deculein was practically a one-man army. When the knights remained silent, the officer quickly composed himself and reiterated that, based on the evidence, it appeared Deculein and Veron had tried to handle the situation, and Veron had met with misfortune during the second attack. Julie thanked him before turning away, her gaze sweeping across the desolate snow-covered landscape. The world around her was an endless expanse of white, the silence so deep it seemed to hum in her ears. Though she had believed herself hardened to loss, her thoughts kept returning to Veron, his life cut short, his relentless determination to rise from nothing, his dreams extinguished here. One of her knights asked if Veron had left anything behind. The officer admitted there was nothing. When another inquired about the attackers, the officer stated that, officially, no one would be held accountable. Incidents on the journey to Berchtesgaden were often overlooked, and with Veron as the only casualty, the higher-ups wouldn't authorize an investigation. Julie stepped forward, her boots crunching in the snow, until she stood at the cliff's edge. The wind cut through her, carrying the scent of ice and pine. Below, the ravine stretched into obscurity, its depths hidden by shifting fog. Somewhere in that abyss lay her comrade. She murmured to herself that he had lived diligently and died as an escort. Tears welled in her eyes as the snow continued to fall, then whispered, "Fool?" The mansion doors had barely closed behind Deculein when Yariel's furious voice cut through the air like a whip. She stormed toward him, her heels striking the marble floor sharply. The butler followed anxiously, his usual composure visibly strained. Yariel accused Deculein of writing another family check, demanding to know if he had forgotten her warnings. She shouted that their finances couldn't sustain such spending and that they wouldn't last 2 more months at this rate, calling him an idiot. Deculein's expression darkened as he realized the wand's commission had exceeded projections. Issuing checks had been a miscalculation, but the dire state of Yukline's finances surprised even him. Cutting through her outburst with cold precision, he told her to calm herself and assured her he had a way to secure more funds. Yariel, still seething, demanded to know what he meant. Deculein led them to the auction items, arranged meticulously in rows, their gilded surfaces gleaming faintly. Yariel scoffed, accusing him of admiring his purchases she believed were nothing but displays of ego. He warned her to be quiet and reminded her that she was the next head of the family, which only fueled her anger further. She retorted that he had no right to lecture her while draining their funds, her voice rising in frustration as the butler attempted to intervene. Ignoring her, Deculein focused on the items before him. He had initially dismissed them as mere vanity investments, but while preparing to return to Berkt, he had realized their true potential. His hand hovered over an ornate vase as he activated Midas Touch, a pulse of golden light rippling across its surface. Yariel, exasperated, mocked him for standing there like a fool. The butler tried to soothe her, but Deculein ignored them both, instructing the butler to summon an appraiser immediately and prepare the items for auction. Yariel paled, protesting that antiques needed time to appreciate in value, and that selling them now would mean losing half of what they had paid. Deculein silenced her with a firm command before turning back to the vase, now transformed. Vase of the Eastern Master Craftsman. Description: a vessel forged with the essence of its creator's soul. Midas Touch has awakened its latent potential. Effects: flowers placed within never wilt. Petals regenerate, imbued with mid to high class fatigue recovery. What was once worth 2.5 million elna was now priceless. As workers carefully lifted the vase, Deculein warned them to handle it with care. Yariel, now more anxious than angry, demanded to know if he was truly selling everything, if this was his way of ruining them completely. He met her gaze calmly, assuring her they would profit, declaring he had lost his mind, then shouted in disbelief when he dismissed her concerns. Deculein checked the time and announced he had to leave for work. Yariel let out a scream of pure frustration as the door clicked shut behind him. 5 students sat around a table, cards in hand, the atmosphere thick with nervous excitement as cards slapped against wood. Ephraim triumphantly declared she had a full house, kings high, fanning her winning hand across the table. A collective groan rose from her opponents, with one student lamenting that this was her 3rd consecutive win, while another protested they'd been just 1 card away from a flush. Leaning back with satisfaction, Ephraim announced that as champion, she was officially waiving a week's cleaning duty. Her grin widened at their groans. When one defeated student started making excuses about how close they'd been, Ephraim cut them off, declaring that excuses were for losers. The group erupted in laughter. It felt like a dream, she marveled inwardly. She was just a baron's daughter who had never even attended the academy. Since entering the tower, she'd been despised by students and professors alike, enduring so many incidents. Yet now, she was in a club with friends. Her smile softened as she admitted she was really liking this ordinary magic exploration. The red-haired girl quickly corrected her in a hushed tone. They were supposed to be the Ordinary Magic Discussion Club, and reminded her to keep up appearances. Ephraim winced and apologized. Crash. The door shuddered on its hinges as Professor Reland's bulk filled the doorway, his jowls quivering with outrage. He demanded to know what was going on. Behind him loomed Beck. Beck sneered that he had warned the professor. These commoners were cluttering the tower with their pointless activities, his voice dripping with faux concern. Of course, Ephraim thought bitterly. Reland and Beck, they turned everything about commoners into an issue. Reland squinted at their makeshift plaque, OMDC. In the novel, it was CMRC, Common Magic Research Club, crudely carved into wood, and barked at them again to explain themselves. Ephraim closed her eyes briefly. It was unwelcome, but expected. She needed to handle this honorably. Calmly, she stated that they had submitted a formal club proposal and received approval. They were an official club. Relin spat in disbelief, demanding to know who had authorized such a farce. Then his finger jabbed toward her as a recognition dawned. She was that lowlife who had been disciplined before. He accused her of being behind this again. Ephraim stiffened. Again. Lowlife. Again. Her gaze sharpened, locking onto Relin's face. Noticing her defiance, Relin laughed mockingly and ordered her to lower her eyes. The red-haired girl tugged at Ephraim's sleeve in warning. Beck chuckled, clearly enjoying the scene. Relin smirked and challenged her. If she was so confident, she should name the professor who had approved this. No upstanding faculty member would permit such nonsense, he sneered. A shadow fell across the doorway. Epiphany's breath caught. Seeing her stunned expression, Relin shouted triumphantly. He knew it. No professor would have allowed such a club to. It was me. Relin froze at the voice. His smirk died mid-breath as he slowly, painfully turned. Deculein stood there, his glare like a blade. The air itself seemed to thicken under his presence, settling on Relin with the weight of a guillotine. In a lethally calm voice, Deculein stated that he had permitted it and asked if Professor Relin had any complaints. Ephraim could only stare, stunned. Deculein looked down at him, the difference in their heights framing the scene perfectly. He addressed Professor Relin, stating that he had heard Relin had been looking for him. Relin stammered in confusion, unable to comprehend why the senior professor was there. Deculein coldly demanded that Relin speak and tell him what he had been complaining about, adding that he didn't have all day. Relin's eyes darted around in panic, his mind racing. He hesitantly mentioned the club, to which Deculein confirmed that he had been the one to grant them permission. Still bewildered, Relin asked why, only for Deculein to sharply retort whether he needed a reason or should have sought Relin's permission first. Internally, Deculein was seething. Yariel had been pestering him since dawn like a mosquito with a vendetta, and now this walking incompetence was wasting his time. Well, Deculein had spent 8.02 million elmas, which is around $5,694,200. Worse, Relin was dripping with sweat, which caused his misophobia to kick in, making the situation even more unpleasant. Relin's breathing grew labored as he desperately searched for an escape. His body trembled, his thoughts in complete disarray. Stammering, he tried to backtrack, insisting that wasn't what he meant. Then, in a sudden burst of inspiration, he loudly declared that the place was far too shabby. The club members exchanged confused glances at his outburst. Gesturing wildly at the club room's interior, Relin barked that he had simply thought the mages of the Imperial University's Mage Tower deserved better equipment and furniture. He claimed it had upset him terribly to see things in such poor condition. After his desperate excuse, he let out a deep sigh, then immediately forced a bright smile. He promised to take responsibility and replace everything with something better. Deculein remarked dryly that Relin was always so considerate, agreeing that the room did look old and worn. Internally, Deculein dismissed the idea of Relin being kind as nonsense. Relin scratched his head, grinning widely as he assured Deculein he would take special care. Deculein turned to leave but paused, casting a sidelong glance at Beck, who flinched under his gaze. With icy disdain, Deculein called them worthless cockroaches who always behaved like the insects they were. His warning sent them scattering away, true to their nature. In the novel, Deculein's glare had fixed on the crowd, specifically the group that had urged Relin on. He knew them well: Beck, Isaiah, and Yupern. With that, Deculein strode off down the corridor. Behind him, Beck stared at his back. In Class A, 3rd floor, the students had been murmuring among themselves before the lecture began. One mentioned that it had been a while since Professor Deculein's last class. Another pointed out that he had been in Bert recently, sparking curiosity about what might have happened there. A third admitted they didn't know the details but mentioned that the Wizard Journal had reported something about a train incident. Another student chimed in, confirming they'd seen the report too. How an entire train had floated midair, which they called unbelievable. Someone else wondered aloud if Deculein would share anything about Bert during class. Then, from the podium, Deculein cut through the noise with a single command, demanding silence, before announcing the start of the lecture. He introduced the day's topic: pure elements and magic interference. He explained that magic interference occurred when one mage disrupted another's spell. Before delving deeper, he announced they would start with a warm-up exercise. At that moment, Alan entered, carrying a large bag. With a flick of basic, beginner psychokinesis, Deculein made its contents, 150 blue mana stones, float midair. The students' eyes widened in awe. Mana stones were invaluable, used in research, production, catalysts, and even as temporary magic amplifiers, a wizard's ultimate multi-tool. Each stone drifted toward a student, hovering just out of reach. Deculein then set the challenge. Each stone was worth 3,000 elm, and if anyone could wrest one from his control through interference, they could keep it. Ephorine's eyes lit up with greed. 3,000 elm was roughly $2,000. She let out an excited squeal before her friend clamped a hand over her mouth. Deculein shot her an annoyed look before continuing. He explained that resisting interference was just as crucial as performing it. Though the defender had the advantage, he encouraged them to try anyway. He stood motionless, effortlessly maintaining control over all 150 stones while the student struggled to seize even one. Internally, Deculein reflected on his own progress. Though he'd recently stopped and lifted an entire train, he had only just memorized basic beginner psychokinesis. He needed more practice to master it fully. He was also curious, even against debutantes, how long could he sustain his hold against 150 mages? Who among them had the skill to break through? Ephorine grinned as she poured mana into her interference. She thought greedily about how expensive mage supplies were and how her sponsorship money was nearly gone. Now that Deculein was handing out free magic stones, she was determined to gratefully take one. Nearby, Sylvia watched Ephorine from the corner of her eye before hardening her resolve. She refused to lose and sharpened her focus, pushing harder. Around them, other students groaned, trembled, and some even coughed up blood from the strain. Standing beside Deculein, Alan was stunned. He remarked that the professor was incredible. He hadn't left a single opening, not even against 150 opponents. The students couldn't interfere at all. Deculein mused that even he was surprised. He hadn't expected them to exhaust themselves so thoroughly without success. Then, a single mana stone trembled. A thin strand of foreign mana had latched onto it. Unsurprisingly, the victor was Sylvia. Panting, she lowered her head, then turned to Ephorine with a smirk. Deculein praised her, declaring she was in first place. Sylvia nodded silently in triumph. He scanned the room, noting that Sylvia's success was expected. As he prepared to conclude the exercise, another stone shook. A second student had broken through. It was Ephorine, her face flushed, nose bleeding, but grinning wildly. "Heh heh, I did it," she cheered. "My 3,000 elm." Sylvia's smirk vanished into a glare. Other students had exerted their utmost effort, yet the challenge had been far more formidable than expected. No, it had been beyond merely formidable. They had pushed themselves to physical extremes, taking in their ashen faces and anguished expressions. Deculein recognized they had reached complete depletion. He abruptly commanded them to stop, acknowledging he had miscalculated the challenge's difficulty. Without delay, he retrieved all mana stones into the bag and dissolved his psychokinesis, leaving the drained students moaning like corpses. He was going to say something to them, but the classroom's state demanded silent observation. The mingled saliva and blood created a nauseating metallic stench that momentarily unsettled even him. An involuntary "pathetic" escaped his lips, further thickening the oppressive atmosphere. Regardless, he wanted nothing more than to depart. Announcing a temporary break, Deculein instructed them with obvious disdain to clean their disgusting mess. The novice wizards felt their confidence shatter against an insurmountable wall. Deculein's psychokinesis had proven an unconquerable fortress, leaving them stunned and confused. How could such basic telekinesis demonstrate such overwhelming power? Traditionally, psychokinesis was considered elementary magic, weak without natural talent and hardly a prestigious discipline. Yet Deculein's flawless execution raised disturbing questions about his other capabilities and the exceptional purity of his mana. Less accomplished mages sought solace in these rationalizations. Julia, still recovering, demanded an explanation from Ephorine about her success where so many had failed completely. Ephorine, barely coherent as she complained about numbness reaching even her tongue. Despite her rudimentary psychokinesis knowledge, she explained how she had instinctively penetrated Deculein's magic matrix. This revelation had granted her a sudden understanding of the spell's architecture, allowing her to manipulate the stones slightly. She shared her epiphany with an astonished Julia. True growth came from challenging masters, not peers. Nearby, Sylvia listened in simmering silence. She couldn't comprehend how the formerly lowest-ranked student had suddenly risen to second place, suspecting Deculein of giving Ephorine secret instruction despite his denials. Watching Ephorine lovingly caress her reward only deepened Sylvia's resentment, prompting muttered accusations of arrogant woman toward those who seemed to bask in their professor's apparent favoritism, at least in Sylvia's judgment. The classroom fell silent the moment Deculein returned to the lecture. He addressed the students about their earlier struggles with magic interference. He revealed there had been an easier method they might have discovered: mana interference. Those who had succeeded might have started to grasp it. Deculein explained that while traditional magic interference blocked already cast spells, mana interference worked by analyzing and disrupting an opponent's casting sequence before completion. However, he cautioned that this advanced technique came with significant limitations that reduced its practicality in real combat situations. A student thought incredulously about the immense knowledge required. One would need to memorize countless spell formulas to attempt such interference. Deculein, as if anticipating this reaction, acknowledged that practitioners could only interfere with spells whose formulas they already understood, which explained its unpopularity. Most wizards preferred simpler defenses or direct counters. His piercing gaze swept across the room as he emphasized that true mastery required dedication. "Without pain, there's no gain," he declared, urging them to study this technique thoroughly. To illustrate his point, he demonstrated how every spell contained a distinctive core circuit pattern that served as the key to disruption. He assured them that once identified, even complex magic interference would become trivial. To demonstrate, he summoned several magic circles in the air. First, he pointed out Piercing Gale Blade, explaining that destruction spells always featured circuits radiating outward, like detonations frozen mid-blast. The students watched in awe as he shared these closely guarded secrets that most wizards would protect jealously, like dragons guarding gold. Yet Deculein shared it freely. Next, for a support-type spell, he continued. The students scribbled furiously, hanging on every syllable. His very pronunciation seemed to engrave itself in their minds, a positive manifestation of his overawe and grace. 2 hours evaporated instantly. At precisely 6 p.m., Deculein ceased mid-sentence and announced that it was all for today. There's still content left, but time's up. The class stirred uneasily. Deculein's punctuality bordered on compulsion. No early dismissals, no overtime. 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, always. A student hesitantly spoke up, pointing out that they hadn't covered easing interference with pure elements. Deculein cut in, stating that they had wasted time earlier and thus had no grounds for complaints. He told them to deduce the rest through their own ingenuity. Straightening his coat, he reminded them that their midterms are approaching, preceded by a public practical. Today's material was critical. They should study it thoroughly. With that, he dismissed them and exited, leaving stunned silence in his wake. The moment he left, murmurs erupted. "Why quit halfway? What's his problem?" one student muttered. "Ugh, this feels like being interrupted mid-shit," another groaned. While Julia voiced her frustration loudly about being expected to imagine the rest, Ephraim laughed in agreement, though privately she felt satisfied with her small personal breakthrough. Then, a sneering voice cut through. Beck, poorly mimicking Deculein's cadence, called out, "Hey, representative of the commoners, Ephraim." Julia bristled, demanding to know why Beck was picking a fight with them again. She reminded him that last time, he had dragged Professor Relin over, and now he was acting like he couldn't even stand seeing them. She asked what his problem was. Officially, the tower rejected status distinctions. Unofficially, nobles like Beck found ways to enforce them. Beck smirked and mocked Ephraim, saying it was because a commoner like her didn't know her place and kept showing off. He questioned how she had jumped from dead last to second place. Ephraim thought, just ignore him. But, she retorted, "HM, even if I told you," Beck interrupted. "Shameless stray, did you bribe him?" Ephraim glared angrily and demanded to know what he had just said. Beck scoffed and asked if he had said something wrong. He claimed that everyone knew she had been receiving private lessons from Professor Deculein. Ephraim shouted that it wasn't true. Sylvia looked at them weirdly. Beck challenged her to explain herself. How could a half-wit like her, who had never graduated from the academy, improve so much in such a short time? He sneered, suggesting that perhaps Professor Deculein had gone easy on her. Maybe he had wanted to sneakily gift a magic stone to the pitiful wench there. That would explain things. Then he added mockingly, "A girl like you with no house or parents can't have." Ephraim was ready to fight. Mana gathered in her bracelet as she gritted her teeth. She dared him to finish that sentence. Ephraim could have threatened to report Beck's slander to Deculein. The cockroach would have crumbled at the thought of crossing the professor. Beck taunted her, saying she really thought her threats would work on him. Ephraim shot back, telling him to keep yapping if he wasn't scared. Julia nervously urged Ephraim not to do it, asking what she would do if she got involved in another disciplinary hearing. Ephraim remembered she had already been to the disciplinary room. The mana in her bracelet dissipated. Ephraim lowered her head. Julia thought she was upset and extended a hand. But Ephraim smiled. She thanked Julia, saying she was right. She had gotten a bit too worked up. Julia happily called out, "Ify!" Ephraim smirked and remarked that talking to a dimwit like Beck must have made her lose a few brain cells. Julia grinned in relief, saying it was all good now that she had calmed down. Beck fumed. "Huh?" But Ephraim and Julia ignored him, already heading out. Ephraim suggested they get something to eat on the way back. Julia agreed immediately. Beck shouted after them, demanding to know where they thought they were going. Sylvia watched the pair depart. Under the quiet evening sky, Ephraim trudged along the university pathways, kicking at the cobblestones. Her dinner had done little to ease her anger toward Beck. She muttered to herself that she had barely restrained herself earlier thanks to Julia, but questioned how she would handle Beck moving forward. She admitted that seeing his face might push her to snap next time. As she walked, she grumbled about what she should do with that haughty little noble bastard. Turning a corner, she noticed Sylvia standing deliberately in her path. Sylvia stated that they needed to talk, prompting Ephraim to wonder suspiciously what Sylvia wanted. Bristling, Ephraim warned that if Sylvia was looking for a fight, she had chosen a bad time and told her to leave her alone. Sylvia, crossing her arms, asked directly if Ephraim was receiving private lessons from Deculein. Ephraim snapped, accusing Sylvia of starting trouble and demanding why she would even ask such a thing, given her history with Deculein. She questioned why she would ever let him tutor her and insisted Sylvia knew nothing. Frustrated, she asked if Sylvia had really stopped just to say something so absurd, exclaiming that everyone seemed out to annoy her today. Sylvia observed Ephraim's outburst calmly, concluding internally that Ephraim was telling the truth. She dismissed the matter, saying it was fine then. As Ephraim began to protest, Sylvia cut her off, revealing that after Ephraim's father's death, Deculein had not entered his laboratory for 3 years. Not even once. Ephraim laughed sharply, stating it was obvious since Deculein was incapable without her father, whom she proudly called a genius. Sylvia, unfazed, continued, noting that 3 months ago Deculein had begun visiting the lab daily, cleaning it, hiring an assistant professor, and purchasing numerous magic items. She asked Ephraim what she thought that meant. Ephraim's smirk faded, and she stiffened as she processed the implication. Internally, she questioned if Deculein was attempting to resume her father's research, doubting he had the capability or right to do so alone. Clenching her fist briefly, she shrugged it off, casually remarking that it sounded like he was experimenting, as professors do, and asked what it had to do with her. Satisfied, Sylvia turned to leave, stating over her shoulder that it was nothing, and she had only mentioned it in case Ephraim was unaware. Left alone, Ephraim stood rooted in place, her thoughts churning as the night deepened around her. A few days later on the practical day, Ephraim found herself standing before a vast expanse, its boundaries stretching beyond her sight. At its heart lay a rectangular stage resembling a grand stadium. The gathered students buzzed with anticipation, their voices filling the air with excitement. Julia, standing beside Ephraim, questioned what kind of practical training Professor Deculein had planned and why he had brought them to such a place. Ephraim, equally puzzled, responded that she had no idea but suspected Deculein was up to something, as usual. Suddenly, Beck barged into Julia with force, prompting her to bristle and call him a jerk. Ephraim, sighing, restrained Julia, urging her to let it go. At precisely 3 o'clock, Deculein appeared at the entrance, and the noisy chatter instantly fell silent. He commanded silence, announcing that class was beginning. He reminded the students that this was the final practical training session before the midterm exams, and with a snap of his fingers, he lifted a veil at the stadium's edge, revealing a crowd of hundreds of spectators. He declared that the day's class would be a public exercise, startling Ephraim and her classmates. Ephraim, wide-eyed, remarked on the sheer number of people present. Deculein explained that students could use any magic to battle one another, but they were required to employ at least 3 pure elemental spells. He clarified that winning or losing was irrelevant. He would focus solely on evaluating the battles, noting each student's strengths and weaknesses to aid their development. He added that Professor Reilin, from the Department of Assistive Studies, would ensure no casualties occurred so they could fight without restraint. Reilin, appearing with a cheerful laugh, assured everyone he would keep the students safe, clearly relishing the attention from both wizards and spectators. Deculein then called for the exercise to begin, summoning Woojin first. Woojin, caught off guard, hesitantly acknowledged the call and climbed onto the stage. After a moment's hesitation, he chose his friend Lawton as his opponent. The two faced each other, tension crackling between them. Deculein gave them 3 minutes and signaled the start. Initially, their magic clashed awkwardly. Woojin conjured a thin veil of fire that enveloped Lawton, who countered by disrupting it with mana. The flames extinguished, producing steam that Lawton froze into sharp, metal-like spikes and hurled at Eurozan. The magical spars unfolded smoothly, each exchange growing more confident. Deculein observed closely, his fountain pen autonomously scribbling notes as he monitored the battles. At first, the students' inexperience with such a format made their movements hesitant, but they gradually adapted, focusing intently and casting their spells with increasing precision. As the battle raged on, punctuated by a blazing fire blast, Sylvia emerged triumphant. Off to the side, Beck sneered, mocking the defeated commoner and suggesting they should have applied to be servants at his estate rather than bothering to attend the mage tower. His follower cackled in agreement. Ephorine, glaring from the sidelines, thought furiously that those arrogant nobles were despicable and that Sylvia could have easily defeated them too. Aloud, she shouted encouragement to Ferret, telling him he did great despite his loss. Deculain's voice cut through the noise, calling Beck to the stage next and instructing him to choose an opponent. With a smirk, Beck named Ephorine. She shot him a fierce glare, thinking to herself that this suited her just fine, and strode confidently onto the stadium. Beck taunted her, questioning if she'd be all right without someone secretly coaching her on how to win. Ephorine, undeterred, retorted sharply, dismissing his nonsense and mocking his habit of pointless babbling, likely learned from his parents. She added that his imitation of Deculain's style was utterly pathetic. Beck bristled at her words, demanding to know what she meant. Ephorine raised her hand, mana swirling around her bracelet, and declared she'd prove his magic was as weak as character. Both charged forward. Beck, enraged, called her a lowly maggot and unleashed a destructive spell, boasting it would reunite her with her parents. The spell swept toward Ephorine, shattering the ground with a deafening bang. Her friend cried out in horror, fearing for her safety. Beck laughed, pouring more mana into his spell, but confusion crossed his face as green mana disrupted his magic. Ephorine, unscathed, had interfered with his spell. She announced that an old proverb had been on her mind since arriving at the Mage Tower. One she claimed stated that nobles deserved a beating. With deft control, she turned Beck's own spell against him. Beck screamed, stumbling back as Ephorine shaped the mana into a fist that sent him flying across the stage. Julia cheered enthusiastically, noting in amusement that no such proverb existed. Beck, sprawled on the ground, groaned in pain, tears welling in his eyes. Ephorine loomed over him, casting a shadow, and asked how it felt to be crushed by a so-called maggot. Professor Relin declared Ephorine the winner. Beck, humiliated by a commoner's victory, muttered that she'd only gotten lucky. Deculein, observing, took notes as his enchanted fountain pen scribbled autonomously. He remarked in frustration that the students' fights had ended too quickly, rendering the presence of the invited guests pointless, as they hadn't witnessed anything noteworthy. Ephorine, about to step off the stage, paused at Deculain's words. She turned and boldly requested another chance. Placing a hand on her chest, she pointed out that the assignment required casting 3 pure elemental spells, but she'd only managed 1 due to her opponent's weakness, which ended the match prematurely. Deculein acknowledged her point, noting that it would be unfair to evaluate her incompletely through no fault of her own, but rather her opponent's inadequacy. He granted her permission to select another opponent from anyone present. Ephorine extended her scarred, calloused finger, proof of relentless effort, and pointed directly at her chosen target. With unwavering resolve, she announced that she chose Professor Deculein himself as her opponent. Previously, arrogant Ephorine chose Professor Deculein as her opponent to prove her worth. Professor Relin shouted in shock, using language harsher than Deculain's typical speech, exclaiming that everyone should look at this crazy bitch and demanding to know what she was talking about. The onlookers whispered among themselves, remarking that she truly appeared insane. Sylvia stood quietly. Ephorine thought to herself that everyone's reaction was exactly as expected. She clenched her fist, acknowledging that while she was no idiot, this was precisely the opportunity she'd wanted, a chance to finally fight Deculein. She was willing to be seen as a lunatic temporarily if it meant seizing this opportunity. Sweat dripped down her brow as she steeled her resolve. A faint, twisted smile appeared on Deculain's lips. Professor Raylan, still furious, spat out that no one had ever seen such a deranged child who clearly didn't understand what she was doing. Deculein coolly interrupted, telling Raylan to calm down, which caused the professor to stammer and deflate. Turning to Ephorine, Deculein declared he would allow the match since he had indeed stated she could select any opponent without restrictions. However, he clarified that a professor couldn't possibly fight a debutante on equal terms. He wouldn't attack first, and she would win if she could make him move from his position. Ephorine nodded in response, her fist tightening as her heart pounded wildly. When Deculein took his position across from her, Ephorine's pulse raced. This was the moment she'd dreamed of. She channeled mana into her bracelet, her unique vessel that allowed her to wield all four elements without penalty, seeing this as her glimmer of hope. When Deculein commanded the match to begin, Eferini immediately attacked with swirling gusts of wind that proved ineffective against his barrier. She thought to herself that she fully understood she couldn't accomplish much against such a powerful opponent now, and that the match itself was reckless, but she wanted to use this opportunity to measure the gap between them. Using acceleration to enhance her magic speed, a technique many mistakenly believed only affected physical movement, she silently prepared her unique attribute. Her bracelet allowed her to command all elements. Unlike other wizards who needed to counter specific elements, she unleashed Wind of Fire, an intermediate spell that created blazing currents around Deculein, while cleverly adding earth properties to amplify the fire with coal particles and oxygen. The stadium roared as her incinerating magic ignited flammable dust and oxygen in a chain reaction of oxidation and combustion. Massive explosions erupted in a destructive cascade that even stunned Professor Relin with its unexpected intensity. Eferine had masterfully combined three elements to maximize fire's devastating power before peering exhaustedly through the smoke, wondering if Deculein had escaped or if she'd gone too far. A cold wind swept away the smoke to reveal Deculein completely unscathed within a shell-like fire barrier, his piercing blue eyes gazing at her. The flames extinguished instantly, leaving Eferine baffled. Biting her lip, she released stray bullet bombs, but every projectile halted within Deculein's range as he effortlessly took control of them, standing motionless while making her feel like a child, playing at war. Deculein noted she had a noticeable habit with magic that became more prominent with bigger movements, his vision ability dissecting her patterns. Eferine's next spell fizzled due to his mana interference, and subsequent attempts failed as her magic refused to form. She thought frantically about whether he had tampered with her magic circuit. Deculein coldly stated she wouldn't be able to use magic in front of him. Eferine gritted her teeth, realizing he had disabled her magical abilities but refusing to surrender. Shouting that magic combat wasn't over yet, she charged at him physically. Unlike many wizards, she hadn't neglected her physical training. With acceleration boosting her speed, she closed the distance instantly, thinking she was more confident in using her body anyway as she aimed to punch. But Deculein's finger met her first with impossible speed, sending her flying painfully to the ground. Deculein observed calmly that while her magic sense was incredible, demonstrated by her effective combination of elements for a dust explosion, without proper dexterity, even great sense was limited. He noted her vessel talent, allowing her to wield all elements through her bracelet, was enviable, thinking the real Deculein would be unsettled by her potential to become unstoppable if properly developed. Approaching the fallen Eferine, Deculein surprised everyone by saying it wasn't bad, with an uncharacteristically serene expression and almost satisfied smile. Turning to the crowd, he announced the end of the public practical and that debutantes should focus on preparing for their upcoming midterms. The students erupted in shocked chatter, noting this was the first time Deculein had ever offered such praise. They acknowledged Eferine had performed far better than expected, especially compared to her boring match with Beck, comments that made Beck tense up visibly. The display only reinforced the head professor's formidable reputation, with the gap between them compared to that of an earthworm and a dragon. Lying dazed on the ground, Eferine wondered if she had actually earned his recognition. Her friends rushed to her side, cheering enthusiastically about her cool performance and declaring her their pride. At the bustling port of Lucan, a Yukline-owned coastal city in the Western Empire, the Red Garnet adventure team awaited a ship's arrival. Ganesha, spotting the vessel approaching from the horizon, announced with a grin that it had finally arrived. As the ship docked amidst the team's lively banter, 3 kids disembarked. Ganesha, her face lighting up, called out to Leo and Carlos asking how they'd been. Her eyes then fell on the girl, whose adorable appearance prompted Ganesha to open her arms for a hug. The girl, responding warmly, greeted Ganesha and confirmed it had been a long time. Ganesha, beaming, welcomed her as Leah and playfully asked if she'd missed him. Leah, with a shy smile and a cute scratch of her head, admitted that she might have missed her a little, her bashful chuckle adding to her charm. This girl was Yuria, an islander now inhabited by the spirit of Yu Ara, the ex-girlfriend of Kim Woojin. At the lively port of Lucan, Ganesha enveloped Leah in a tight embrace, exclaiming that she had deeply missed her adorable Rhea. Leah, struggling to breathe, protested that it hurt and called it child abuse. Ganesha, chuckling, apologized and loosened her grip. Leah, momentarily dazed, gazed downward, her mind drifting to the moment she was transmigrated into this world. She recalled a blinding light that had engulfed and erased her, silencing the sounds of her original world. When she opened her eyes, her former reality had vanished without a trace. In the distance, the Red Garnet adventure team engaged in a heated discussion. Ganesha expressed reluctance to involve a child like Leah in Deculane's plans, stating she couldn't take on such a job. A teammate retorted that she shouldn't have accepted the task, teasing that she had been swayed by Deculane's charm, and warning about the steep cancellation fee. Leah, observing them, thought to herself that the people before her seemed familiar. She realized that the characters and stories she and her team had tirelessly crafted were now standing before her in reality. Meanwhile, the teammate, battered from a recent scuffle, vowed to exact revenge. Ganesha approached the girl, greeting her warmly and introducing herself as an adventurer named Ganesha. She asked if the girl was Ria. Uriah, confused, processed the situation. The name Ria, Ganesha, the Red Garnet adventurers, the warm air, and the scent of nature. She wondered if she was truly inside the game she had helped create. With a mix of realization and apprehension, she confirmed that she was Uriah, acknowledging that this was how she became Uriah, a character from her own game. The scene shifted to the vibrant streets of the coastal city. Two children, Leo and Carlos, darted through the crowd as Ganesha called out for them to stop running. Leah walked alongside Ganesha, noting in her thoughts that Ganesha was this world's greatest adventurer. Staring at her, Leah resolved that to survive, her best strategy was to stay close to Ganesha. She was determined to endure and find a way to return to her original world. In the grand halls of the Deculein mansion, Deculein carefully opened a delivery box, announcing with quiet satisfaction that it had finally arrived. Inside, nestled on a white cloth, lay a magically glowing wand. Lokelok's Yukline wand. Information: a dedicated wand crafted by master artisan Lokelok for Deculein von Grahan-Yukline. Category: Wand. Special effects: stores 500 mana. Acts as a supporting circuit, naturally enhancing the performance of cast magic. Material trait: crafted from ironwood, harnessing the wood's natural abilities and properties, deemed the finest among wood materials. Automatic learning: aids the caster in independently understanding their magic and optimizing its use. Aesthetic: item. Its exquisite design adapts to the user's attire, shifting colors to complement their outfit. Deculein, gazing at the wand's radiant activation, thought to himself that it was beautiful, his trait of aesthetic sense stirred by its elegance. He noted its unique item trait, marveling that it even possessed such a quality. He reflected that the Yukline bloodline imbued the wand with extraordinary power, capable of exorcising or expelling demons. Holding the wand, Deculein mused that its original cost of 9 million elni, which is around 6,390,000, had seemed steep, but now, having received it, he recognized its value far exceeded the price. He thought it possessed the beauty and performance befitting a relic, a masterpiece of both form and function. In both the manhwa and novel, Deculein receives a custom-made magical item crafted by the master craftsman Lokelok, or Rokelok, which he greatly admires. While the scenes share similarities, they diverge in the item's nature and the context of its delivery. Key differences: first item. Type and characteristics. Wand. Manhwa. The wand is an elegant, relic-like item emphasizing magical prowess. It boasts a 500 mana storage capacity, enhances spell performance, and adapts aesthetically to its user. Its description highlights sophistication and power, making it feel like a coveted artifact. Cane. Novel. The cane serves similar functions, mana storage and magical enhancement. Its design feels less ornate, prioritizing durability and functionality over the wand's refined elegance. Delivery context. Manhwa. The scene is concise, with Deculein already holding the box at his mansion. The focus remains on the wand's reveal and Deculein's internal admiration, with minimal external interaction. Novel. The delivery is more elaborate, featuring an adventurer from Berkt delivering the package. This adds world building, showcasing adventurers handling mundane tasks like deliveries and Deculein's brief exchange with the delivery man. So, what do you think, readers? Would you choose the sleek, powerful wand or the sturdy, practical cane? Butler Roy knocked on the door, announcing that dinner was ready. Deculein, turning toward the door, responded that he would head down shortly. In the dining hall, a lavishly set table brimmed with an array of gourmet dishes, more extravagant than usual. Deculein, seated and pensive, remarked that he had heard their finances were strained and questioned the reason for such a bountiful spread. He directed his inquiry to Yariel, seated across from him. Yariel, with a huff, explained that they needed the energy to overcome their challenges and that she had instructed the staff to prepare the feast to boost Deculeine's spirits. Roy, standing attentively beside Deculeine, added that they had sold the antiques as previously directed, noting their popularity. He shared that at the auction house, every item had attracted bids immediately upon reveal, a success attributed to discreet handling of the process. Roy continued, explaining that he and Yariel had felt as though they were dreaming, as the sales had generated more than enough funds to secure the estate's finances for years. He presented the lavish dinner as a gesture of Yariel's gratitude. Deculeine, visibly pleased, commented that it was good. Yariel, caught off guard by his rare compliment, responded casually, trying to mask her surprise, which softened the atmosphere. However, Deculeine soon pointed out that Yariel was holding her knife improperly. Yariel, exasperated, retorted with frustration, breaking the calm with her outburst. The final bid for the flower vase was no less than 21 million, which is around 14,910,000. Of course, it would only be between 13 and 15 million elms, after deducting commission, tax, and other fees, but it was more than twice what Deculeine expected. Later, in Deculeine's office, stacks of paperwork cluttered the desk. Deculeine, his expression one of frustration, muttered that the situation was an absolute mess, cursing the uncouth nature of the original Deculeine. As he sifted through the documents, he focused on preparing for the upcoming midterms, dedicating significant effort to crafting exam questions. To gather ideas, he reviewed past test questions submitted by the original Deculeine, only to grit his teeth in exasperation. He remarked aloud that the questions were impossibly difficult for debutantes, reflecting the arrogance of the original Deculeine. In his thoughts, he lamented that, as the high and noble Deculeine, an accomplished mage, he felt despair at the sheer hubris embedded in those questions. He noted that one could judge the original Deculeine's personality solely from the questions, presuming that Deculeine had mistaken excessive difficulty for his own superiority, resulting in such impractical challenges. Determined to differ, Deculeine resolved to create good questions, ones that would challenge students through their process, instill pride upon solving, and foster understanding among young magicians. He reflected that, as a professor, his actions could critically shape the growth of these budding wizards. Placing a hand on his chin, he contemplated questions that would spark both intellectual and emotional growth. His gaze fell on a closed box, the last to be examined. He wondered aloud if its contents would yield anything useful. Upon opening it, his eyes widened in surprise. He exclaimed that the questions inside were entirely different from the others, noting that they seemed crafted by a different person. While still difficult, these questions were designed to ignite profound interest. He decided to use his understanding trait to analyze them thoroughly, planning to infuse their solutions into the paper. As he channeled mana into the paper, magical energy surged, indicating he was actively solving the questions. The energy began to materialize, forming a glowing hand adorned with swirling light. From the waist up, an ethereal figure of a woman with long, flowing white hair emerged. Gazing upward, a ghostly girl floated before Deculeine, who stared in awe. He marveled aloud that this exam allowed students to solve questions, provide correct answers, and witness an illustration materialize. He described how the colors represented the elements, and the harmonized solution would evoke amazement, deeming it the most fitting question for the subject, understanding pure elemental magic. Touching his chest, he admitted to feeling an instinctive jealousy, certain that the original Deculeine would recognize the perfection of this question, a beauty he himself could not have crafted. Gazing at the spectral woman, Deculeine wondered aloud who she could be, captivated by the mystery of her identity. In the opulent private office of the Imperial University Tower's Board of Directors, Chairman received intriguing news. It was an order from Berkt concerning the Red Box or the Blood Shroud. If this were a game, most would have wagered 10 million or even 100 million elnas that the order would mandate the suppression of the Red Box. Yet, the outcome was the opposite, and Deculeine's vehement contribution to this surprising result made it all the more astonishing. Reading the news, the chairman remarked aloud how interesting it was that the discussion about the Blood Shrouds had turned out this way due to a strong aversion to their suppression. She noted that this development was unexpected, particularly for Professor Deculeine. Setting the news down, her intense gaze swept the room as she addressed everyone present, emphasizing that this applied to all of them as well. In the heart of the Imperial University's Magic Tower, Chairwoman Adeline, a mage renowned for her immense magical prowess and a top candidate for Archmage. But despite that, she surprisingly has an easygoing personality. Despite her formidable power, her love for gossip and worldly affairs stemmed from a hidden truth. She was a half-fairy, a trait that fueled both her extraordinary magic and her playful personality. Though she often grumbled, she secretly relished days filled with intrigue. From a corner, Adeline had previously observed Deculein and Knight Julie embroiled in a heated argument, and she'd heard that Professor Relin had once again failed his diet. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she exclaimed over the drama, delighting in the tower's latest scandals. Now, addressing the gathered professors during their monthly meeting, Adeline noted that Professor Deculein had been acting strangely, even defending the red box at Berkt. She remarked that such behavior was unexpected for him. The Magic Tower's professors gather before the chairwoman to make an appearance once a month, and that day is today. And Deculein often found himself in awkward situations, typically proclaiming his superiority as a Yukline, and denying any intent to impress others. This time, however, Professor Retland cautiously spoke, only while in Deculein's absence, informing the chairwoman that Lady Luina had made an appearance at the Sorcerer Council meeting. Adeline's thoughts turned to Luina, who had once competed with Deculein for the chief professor position but resigned due to an unexpected incident and was believed to be in the kingdom. Adeline, smiling brightly, questioned what had prompted Luina's sudden return to the Empire. Retlan, laughing, suggested that a guaranteed position would naturally draw her back, adding that her accomplishments in the kingdom would greatly benefit the Magic Tower. Retlan subtly implying that Deculein's recent alignment with heretics cast doubt on his leadership, though he quickly clarified he wasn't criticizing the current chief professor. Adeline, catching Retlan's intent, smiled and waved off the discussion, promising to consider Luina's return. She abruptly ended the meeting, urging professors who hadn't submitted their exam questions to hurry, as she had other matters to attend to. The professors, dismissed with her positive demeanor, left the office with bright expressions. Alone, Adeline sat deep in thought, her tea or coffee resting on the table. She pulled out documents, musing that Deculein had been off lately. She examined the test he'd submitted, noting its questions were so well crafted they could be used for the prestigious Solda promotion test. Skeptical, she doubted Deculein could have created them alone. With a mischievous glint, she thought about teasing him and gleefully anticipated the excitement if Luina, his arch-rival, returned to stir things up. A few days later, on the day of the midterm exam for understanding pure elemental magic, the classroom buzzed with student chatter. They expressed disbelief, questioning if this was truly a test, marveling at its bizarre nature. Some confirmed rumors of Deculein's strange exams, while ha 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 ha, others laughed, admitting they were ready to give up. Alan, standing at the podium, called for calm. He acknowledged the students' confusion, explaining that this was no ordinary exam, but precisely as described. He announced that the midterm would span 10 days, concluding at midnight on the academic schedule's final Sunday. Each student would take the test individually in an assigned room, permitted to leave for other exams, meals, or sleep, but forbidden from removing their test papers. He emphasized that it was an open-book exam. Julia, seated beside Ephraim, remarked in shock that a 10-day open-book exam suggested an extraordinary level of difficulty. Ephraim, clutching her head, groaned that surviving Deculein's last exam was torturous enough, complaining that he never created anything normal and always delegated the odd announcements to his assistant professor. Alan added that Professor Deculein had promised a letter of recommendation under his title as chief professor for anyone who achieved a perfect score. The students' eyes widened at this revelation, recognizing the immense value of such a letter. The Archmage ranks, spanning from rank 1, Eternal Archmage, to rank 11, Debutante, were notoriously hard to climb. Advancement required passing grueling promotion exams, not merely completing courses or waiting. A rank 4, Archmage, a monarch holding Deculein's recommendation, would wield a virtual guarantee of promotion, akin to a wild card. Ephraim, however, bristled at the idea, thinking that a recommendation from Deculein, her sworn enemy, drained her motivation to excel. She wanted no association with him. But then, her perspective shifted. She imagined that if she did earn a perfect score and secured his recommendation, she could one day stand over him triumphantly. In her mind's eye, she pictured herself stepping on Deculein's head, bah ha ha, laughing and taunting that his recommendation had led to his own downfall, while he pleaded for mercy from the great Ephraim. Snapping back to reality, Ephraim, head bowed, chuckled deviously, thinking how satisfying it would be to outshine Deculein. She vowed to achieve a perfect score. Coo-hoo, coo-hoo-hoo, coo-coo-coo-coo. Her odd laughter drew a curious stare from Julia. On the fourth day of the Understanding Pure Elemental Magic midterm exam, Ephorine sat in her assigned room, clutching her head in frustration. She thought grimly that the test was brutally difficult, with each new question escalating in complexity after hours of effort. 1 hour, 4 hours, 10 hours. Despite the agony, she marveled at the brilliance of the questions, noting that solving them brought a profound sense of realization she'd never experienced before. She questioned whether Deculein could have crafted such a test, admitting that while it was torturous, the joy of enlightenment kept her hooked. Determined, she vowed to earn his recommendation letter. Initially, Ephorine had tackled the test confidently. The first question, which asked her to calculate the circuit of a given technique, was theoretical and manageable. Using her intuition, she released mana through her fingers, recreating the circuit as she computed. After an hour, she sighed in relief, infused the correct amount of mana into the answer column, and moved on. The second question, requiring her to infer the mana flow from a key circuit, was slightly harder but still theoretical. It took her 3 to 4 hours to solve. However, the third question posed a real challenge. Deduce a specific magic formula from a given circuit under certain conditions, express the magic, and implant it into the test paper. Now, on the fourth day, frustrated, she stared at the paper and muttered that she couldn't crack the question. Deciding her brain ached from sitting too long, she chose to step outside for fresh air. At Academy Guardant, Sylvia sat exhausted on a bench, exhaling heavily. She remarked that she'd finally solved a question after 30 grueling hours and needed a brief break. Reflecting on Deculein's promise of a recommendation letter, she scoffed, thinking it was a meaningless gesture. Anyone capable of a perfect score wouldn't need it to pass a promotion exam. Yet, she admitted to herself that she craved a perfect score, not for grades or the letter, but for personal growth. She found each question beautifully crafted, each a key to unique enlightenment that would elevate her as a mage if she could solve them all. Spotting Sylvia, Ephorine called out in surprise. Sylvia, recognizing her, wondered how far Ephorine had progressed. Their voices overlapped as they awkwardly asked each other how many questions they'd solved. Sylvia, shrugging, revealed she was working on question 8. Ephorine, envious, exclaimed that reaching question 8 was impressive, admitting she was stuck on question 7. Sylvia, surprised by Ephorine's pace, thought it was fast, wondering if Ephorine was lying, but dismissing the concern to focus on her own test. Ephorine, noticing Sylvia rise, asked if it was because of her. Sylvia clarified she was merely taking a break. The question confounding Ephorine was question number 7. When magic with a given core circuit satisfies 4 specific conditions, infer the complete formula and implement the magic. As the students of the Magic Tower grappled with their midterm exams, Deculein sensed a monumental shift looming on the horizon. Seated in his office, he scanned a newspaper, murmuring to himself that the true events were now beginning to unfold. The headline in bold print declared, "Emperor Grahan, currently in critical condition." Lost in thought, Deculein considered the seriousness of the news. Emperor Grahan, known for his kind and calm nature, had always worked to balance divine and imperial power, avoiding conflict with the Bloodshrouds. But the real problem was the new king, crowned after Grahan's death, a person who would become the most significant and challenging figure in the land. Deculein knew this successor was Sophien Yekatere, August von Grahan, and he believed her rise would soon bring major changes to the world. As dawn broke, weary students stumbled out, tears streaming down their eyes, shadowed by dark circles, as if raising white flags after a brutal battle. Deculein's infamous marathon exam for the Understanding Pure Elemental Magic midterm had pushed them to their limits, with many dropping out along the way. Yet the test clearly separated the weaker from the stronger students. Regardless of their scores, proud, introspective, those who finished wore their survival like a badge of pride. Instead of celebrating their freedom when the exam ended, they quietly reflected on the lessons they'd gained, a reaction that sparked curiosity far and wide. Even the Magic Tower's professors were intrigued, itching to see the legendary exam questions for themselves. At that moment, only 2 students remained, locked in a struggle with the final hurdle. Question number 8. In the lit confines of Ephorine's exam room, she hunched over her desk, grappling with the final challenge. Muttering to herself, frustrated, muttering, she cursed the 8th question as the ultimate hurdle but vowed to conquer it, fueled by the copious amounts of coffee she'd consumed. Looking like a zombie, she pushed herself to focus. Suddenly, her pencil stopped as a spark of understanding hit her. In the hallway, Assistant Professor Alan and Deculein felt a rush of magical energy. Alan called out to Deculein, who nodded, certain one of the students had cracked the final question. In his mind, he knew it was her. Stepping into the room and closing the door, Deculein, I knew you'd solve it, he said warmly, congratulating her. Sylvia turned, tears in her eyes, standing in a room transformed by her magic. The walls and ceiling bloomed with cypress trees and golden wheat fields, while a gentle breeze and twinkling starlight swirled above like a scene from Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night. Deculein stood in awe. The vivid colors, woven with magic, glowed with warmth despite their cool blue tones. The stars sparkled with hope in the dark, both fiery and sharp, a true work of art. He gathered some of the magical energy in his hand. Though he'd written the questions, he couldn't manifest such beauty due to his own limitations. In his heart, he felt the spirit of Kim Woojin, a man who had dreamed of becoming an artist but lacked the talent, was woven into this question. Kim Woojin had yearned to evoke emotion through his art, and this question, fused with Deculein's own aesthetic sense skill, fulfilled that dream. Both Deculein, who cherished beauty, and Kim Woojin, who aspired to art school, found solace in this moment. Turning to Sylvia, Deculein praised her work and thanked her before leaving the room. Sylvia, stunned by his unexpected gratitude, stared at the door. She whispered that she too wanted to thank him, touching the magical elements in awe of their beauty. As she stood surrounded by glowing light, soft breezes, and vibrant colors, memories flooded back. People urging her to become an archmage, praising her talent and tying her potential to her family's legacy of archmages. Yet Sylvia rejected those expectations, declaring that magic itself was inherently beautiful. A single tear, held back since her mother's death, fell as she stood immersed in the enchanting display. In the quiet of Ephorine's exam room, Assistant Professor Allen opened the door and called out, "Time's up, Ephorine." Ephorine, head bowed, looked up with a strained smile, expressing regret that it was a shame she couldn't finish. Allen stepped inside to collect her exam paper, commending her effort and noting that only 2 students had persisted with the final question until the end. Handing over her paper, Ephorine asked if Sylvia had answered all the questions. Allen nodded, and Ephorine let out a heavy sigh. "She's a monster. I'm jealous." But as she sat there, thoughts of recommendation letters and stepping on Deculein vanished. All she felt was a burning curiosity and a hunger to learn. She wanted to solve every question, just like Sylvia. Ephorine declared that while the exam was over, the question remained. Allen looked puzzled. She vowed to solve it. With a playful smile, Allen smiled warmly, wishing her luck and saying he'd root for her. Ephorine responded with an enthusiastic shout, affirming her determination. As dusk fell over the academy, Ephorine trudged across the grounds, her shoulders heavy from the grueling exam. She mumbled about her exhaustion, wishing she'd answered every question to feel that sense of pride. Instead, she faced returning to her graffiti-covered door and cold bed. Lost in thought, she didn't notice 3 figures ahead until Julia's cheerful voice rang out. "Effie!" Ephorine's head snapped up and she saw her friends. Julia flashed a peace sign, shouting, "Ta-da!" and declared it was tradition to unwind together after exams, suggesting they go eat something delicious. Ephorine's eyes filled with tears as she called Julia's name, her heart swelling. Since her father's death, she had felt lonely, with no one to care for her. Julia, catching her expression, teased that Ephorine looked silly and asked if the test was that tough. Then, turning to the group, Julia declared that since Ephorine was the reason they were out so late, she'd be paying for the meal. Ephorine, flustered at the thought of spending her meager funds, stammered that she hadn't agreed to that, protesting as Julia teased her further.